You see, your mug is better quality than mine. We are now recording! Yay! Make your face bigger than yours. Yeah. Charlotte, I love your mug. I think it's fab. You can tell us more about it in a minute. But Charlotte Cheshire, yay! So nice to
Finally, I
see
see you in the flesh, sort of.
Actually in the flesh. Actually real people, not just avatars on Facebook. Vogue. Controversial. Voguing Vickers. Oh, whatever next.
Oh, that's a whole different conversation right there.
That's a whole different video for after hours. It is nice to see you, Charlotte. Thank you for being another one of my victims. Interviewees. For this series on shielding clergy. Let's start with the easy stuff, which is before COVID, BC. What were you doing in terms of professional life and household life? What was going on for you?
Okay, so I am in Leeds Diocese in West Yorkshire, and I have a 50% responsibility for two churches. Christchurch Mould Green and St James Rawthorpe is half of my week, and the other half of my week I am the coordinating Anglican chaplain for the University of Huddersfield.
Okay.
So in my spare time, yeah, I have a lot of jobs. And pre-COVID, my household was myself, my husband Chris, and my son Adam, and intermittently my stepson George, as well as associated furry people, some of whom you will see.
Just see a pooch over your shoulder, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't actually have a furry growth, just so you know. Two dogs, two cats, a guinea pig, Yeah, pretty much Noah's Ark in here.
And life before COVID was, certainly home life was complicated by medical needs. Do you want to, in a nutshell, give us a snapshot of that?
Okay, so on one level, there are my son's disabilities. My son Adam, who is 9, when he was born, he had group B strep meningitis. And although he survived an infection that nobody ever thought he was going to survive, he was left with quite a number of disabilities as a result. So he's hearing impaired, he's visually impaired, he's autistic, he's asthmatic, and he has quite a few learning difficulties that go along with that. So life has always been complex for the last 9 years anyway.
Yeah.
2 years ago, when I finished curacy and I felt the call to move to Yorkshire and to pursue this post in Leeds Diocese, we decided to move up for the new adventure, and it was always going to be wonderful and amazing. A year later, my husband Chris was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Sure.
So for 7 months before lockdown actually happened, we were already in the midst of dealing with that horrible situation of coping with his impending death, his symptoms, and so in many ways, having a quieter, more in the house, I suppose, sort of lifestyle started for us long before COVID because of my husband's illness.
Sure. And just remind me, when did Chris die?
Chris died on the 24th of April, so about a month into lockdown.
That's a lot to deal with, which could easily be a whole other set of interviews on how we deal with trauma and death. Probably not for now, but it does kind of flavour your experience of what lockdown meant for you, not just as a wife and a mother, not just as part of a household, not just as part of being a priest and a chaplain, but the additional layer of impending reality of grief, and all the complications of Chris's health as it deteriorated over that last month through the beginning of lockdown. So without sounding glib, what did lockdown and shielding mean for you, and how did it adjust how you were a priest and a chaplain and everything as part of life?
Well, in certain respects, because of Chris's illness, I'd already been signed off work for a number of months in that sense. So if I take it on the doing aspect, I already wasn't doing much that is typically associated with priesthood. And so I was spending an awful lot more time in the house anyway, because I was looking after Chris full time. And then when Adam was home from school, I was looking after him. But once it got to the point of lockdown, at that point in time, not only was my son Adam no longer in his special needs school, which is huge, because routine and structure is incredibly important to him. So it wasn't just a case of, oh, suddenly I have to try and homeschool my child, which I know everybody has dealt with. Having a child who has as many complex interlinking disabilities as my son does, it's not as simple a matter of saying, oh, here's some math worksheets, you can still do your homeschooling. So school shut down, and then on top of that, because of his disabilities, we have various other respite and disability type activities that are available to him, so that he can interact and socialize with his peers who are other disabled children, and all of those shut down as well. So for me, when lockdown happened, it was all of the lifelines, if you like, that had kept me sane in terms of dealing with Chris's illness, of it's okay, at least Adam is being looked after so I can focus on Chris. All of that went.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, Chris was in hospice, nearing the end of his life. So in some ways, his medical needs were taken care of, but at the same time, knowing that my husband was nearing the end of his life, suddenly I couldn't visit him because I was full-time looking after my autistic boy. So yeah, it was, despite already being off work, I guess what I'm saying is that it was a huge adjustment right from the start. And
were there fears about, obviously, standard shielders just lock themselves in their homes and things are brought to them and there is no going beyond the front door? But of course, the complication you had, or the additional challenge, was I guess Adam needs to go out because he needs to be beyond the house, and that routine of being out and in had gone, so there was that challenge there. But also you need to go out the house to go and visit the hospice, where of course there's the transmission risk of leaving your front door is huge, and having to balance all those things together. I'm amazed you're still here and in one piece.
Just about. So just as lockdown was happening, there was sort of a, I guess you could say, a bit of a bridge, in that Chris was still at home for a while, although at that point in time he was bedbound. So as it was first starting to be planned, I was thinking that we would have to have a scenario where we would still have carers and district nurses and all that kind of thing come in to meet his very real and huge physical needs. And how on earth do you shield in that kind of circumstance? Because the one thing I probably haven't said is that perhaps obviously there was a huge element of shielding for him, because he had terminal cancer. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, I have incredibly severe asthma. It's not unusual for me to have all of the medication and rides in the nice yellow taxi with blue lights on top. And my son, in addition to all of his disabilities, also has moderate asthma, but there's always been some suggestion that his immune system might be a little bit compromised because of the meningitis, just because he catches things more easily.
Yeah.
So right at the beginning of lockdown, we were kind of thinking, okay, we should be shielding for obvious reasons, but how on earth do we shield if we have to have nurses and carers and everything else come in? And in some ways that was solved, it sounds kind of awful, but solved by Chris going to the hospice, because then all of his medical care was there. Yeah. But at the same time, as you quite rightly say, there's still an autistic child at home. And then there's still the scenario of me as his wife. I want to see my husband, particularly as I knew his life was coming to an end. Yeah. But the hospice were also locking down. So in normal terms, the hospice is very family friendly, and they're perfectly happy with you going, with you staying, with there being adults, children, they're fine with it. But in COVID times, they had to suddenly become an awful lot more like a hospital, and you have to wear the PPE and you have to have limited visitors. And one of the many things of having an autistic child is that he cannot handle PPE. Yeah. He will not accept gloves, a mask, an apron. He will just about wash his hands, but he won't accept everything else. So the one time that I tried to take him to visit Chris in the hospice, and we had to put all the gear on, he was just in a mess, screaming on the floor and ripping it all off because couldn't handle it. So complicated, I guess, is the answer to the question. Yeah.
So complicated home life, complicated medical situations, all the challenges of life, really complicated by COVID, just throwing everything up in the air that you would normally know how to deal with. How about your priestly stuff, which is already slightly adjusted in the light of Chris and his needs? How have you been a priest through all of this, maintaining that priestly sense of presence? and chaplaincy. How are you a chaplain from home with all this going on?
Well, first of all, I have to say you are incredibly fortunate, and I hope you consider yourself to be fortunate, because I'm not in PJs today. And I've actually put on a collar specifically for you.
Top half.
I do hope you consider yourself to be hugely privileged in that.
Although I am intrigued by doing an interview series on clergy pajamas, but maybe not.
That would be a whole other conversation.
It would. Anyway.
I think the thing for me that has most definitely been a learning curve, it's not something that has been an instant overnight epiphany. It's a common conversation in clergy circles, but it's definitely one that I've had to confront recently. Is priesthood about doing, or is priesthood about being? So if I'm not wearing this on any given day, am I suddenly not a priest?
It comes off. Are you okay?
I know it comes
right.
off amazing.
Oh, wait, mine does that too, but it's a bit tight.
You know, if I'm not wearing that, does that mean
I'm not a priest?
Yeah. If I'm not in my church building and celebrating the Eucharist or taking home communion to somebody, does that mean I'm suddenly not a priest? Well, no is the answer. And I've definitely had some periods during this lockdown where I've chosen to share things on the church website or on Facebook, or I've put sermons up or that kind of thing. I had the incredibly poignant experience that I ended up giving last rites to my husband, which is not something I ever expected to be part of my priestly journey. But
not trained for that, are we?
Yeah, but in that moment in time in the hospice, nobody else could come in. So I was there as his next of kin, and I'm also a priest. Yeah. So I chose to, in that moment, put on that identity and to do priesting. Yeah. But for me, it is about what my identity is, whether I'm wearing the collar or not, whether I'm working, whether I'm either in a building or whether I'm sharing things online. Yeah. All of that notwithstanding, I'm still a priest. It's part of who I am. So even some of it has been about the way that I've asked the questions through this. Because perhaps some people who might be Christians but not ordained might certainly still be questioning this sort of thing through the lens of their faith. But I still encounter people sending me messages saying, can you still pray for me? Or how on earth are you holding on to your faith in the midst of this? Don't you just want to tell God where to go? The answer is yes, can I just say. There has been a lot of Anglo-Saxon in the prayers, and that's okay. But being a priest is about being. It's not necessarily about doing. And sure, there's a lot of doing in our work. Of course there is in normal times. But as during this shutdown, we've discovered so much of what our usual doing would be is stripped away. All of us, I think, as priests have had to find a new way of being. And perhaps for me, there's just been that extra layer of being signed off. So I really don't have any obligation to do at all, but I am still a priest. And to be fair, there have been times when I have chosen to put a sermon on the church website. And I've had the Archdeacon on the phone going, now, Charlotte, you know you're signed off. You know you don't have to. Yes, I know. And just that dealing with but I should be doing, of all of the times that my congregations need my support, it definitely should be now. But I can't. And just treading that line has definitely been a learning experience and a challenge through all of this.
Now, here's an interesting question, which I'm asking all of my lovely interviewees, which is God. Not explain God, that would be beyond the scope of this.
Might be a bit beyond this conversation.
Trinity Sunday has been in God. We can do the heresy later. But
glad
Sunday, everyone's favourite Sunday. But something about God being present or not present or close or far away. And I love the fact that you were very honest and said, in your prayers, which indicates you are still praying, which is a good thing. There's been a lot of Anglo-Saxon, a lot of honesty, a lot of, when I pray, there will be an honesty with God that goes beyond the social convention of politeness. And actually, which indicates that God, at least sometimes, is close enough to hear you pray. So where has God been, and your experience of being alongside God or not through this last few months?
So to be perfectly honest, when Chris was first diagnosed, there was no praying going on. There was an awful lot of shouting at the sky, and quite a lot of Anglo-Saxon that wasn't framed in a prayer. And I do have to be honest about that, because I may wear one of these and I might be a priest, but I am also still a human being and a wife and a mother who was thinking, what on earth is the future going to look like? So in the early days, there was no praying. The thing, and at that point in time, when my bishop would come and visit me, because they've been wonderful in terms of that pastoral care and visiting me. So when my bishop would come and visit me, at that point in time, he would say, you know, if you can't pray, that's fine. In this season, we will pray for you and we will pray with you until such time as you're able to again. Yes. And as I said earlier, my son is autistic, and that means that he has very fixed, clear routines. So one of his routines is that before bed, once he's had his shower and put his nappy on, it's very, very fixed that we have to read stories. Yeah. Then it's time to pray. And what he means by that is saying the Lord's Prayer. Yeah. Then it was time to pray for Daddy. And then it was time to sing our song, which for him is the Compline hymn, because, you know, every parent teaches their child an 8th century hymn.
Yeah. Don't tell my 9-year-old, he'd be like, do what now?
But it's very soothing, it's very calming. And I say that because in those early days when I couldn't pray, Adam still had his routine and he still needed that routine. So he needed time to pray still to happen. And at that point in time, I said the Lord's Prayer through gritted teeth and often tears pouring down my face. And I was doing it for him, not for me. But as I repeated those words that many people have called rote or habit, as I had to repeat those every single day, eventually they started to become prayers again. And as I was thinking this question of where is God in the midst of this, in lockdown, in shielding, in my husband's diagnosis, in the fact that we've already been through quite a bit with our son, where is God in all of this? And the thing that really held me was reflecting on some of the Bible passages that show that God is with us through the tough times. And I'd like to try and show you this if you can see it on the camera. Another local member of clergy sent me this postcard, which is a depiction of the point when Jesus is walking on the water and Peter asks if he should come out of the boat and walk with him.
Yes.
Now, most of the depictions of that particular scene, I see 2 men walking on the waves, and Peter is maybe sinking down to his ankles, maybe even on a profound one, he's sinking down to his knees. But for me, seeing this image, where the only thing you can see is his hand reaching up out of the waves, saying help, and in turn, Jesus' hand reaching down to grab him. Yeah. For me, that really spoke to me of
huge.
In the midst of this time, when it feels like I'm drowning, it feels like, God, where are you? Have you abandoned me? Yeah. But there's still Christ's hand reaching into the waves. Yeah. And in the final months of Chris's life, because during this cancer diagnosis is when he finally discovered faith of his own. He had always supported mine, but hadn't had his own. Yeah. But he chose to be confirmed last August, and then in this last year of his life was exploring his own faith. And I didn't actually show it to him, but he came across that verse in Isaiah 43, the one that says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you." The reason that that gave him such comfort, and in turn gave me such comfort, was that as much as I might have wished it otherwise, it never said the waves and the water aren't going to happen. It never said the fire isn't going to happen. What it actually said is, I'll be with you in it. Yeah. And if anybody had said to me in those moments in time, well, the waves aren't there because God's with you. The fire isn't there. Well, yeah, hello, it is.
Yeah, look around.
Yeah, exactly. And it was that, how on earth do you walk with faith, somehow, even when you feel like you're drowning, manage to reach that hand up out of the waves and to grab God's hand and to say, somehow, just be with me in this. If you can pull me out of it, that's great. But even if you can't, hold on to me.
Yeah, don't let go. Don't let go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been my thing through this. It's the times when I've been able to pray, the times when I haven't, the times when I simply have not been able to pray, if you like, from extempore words from my own heart. But it has actually been my autistic son that has kept me praying, because it was non-negotiable to not say the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, that's what you do.
Had to happen. Yeah.
God bless Adam and his ministry. Look at that.
Absolutely.
He's only 9, but flipping heck. Our children, do you know, I do think children have a greater ministry than we give them credit for. We, the Church of England, the system. And I said that as a former youth and children's worker who's always been passionate about children ministering to adults in a safe way, obviously, but, you know, rather than just potential ministers when they grow up. It's like, no, look through scripture. Loads of kids who are ministering even before society thought they could. That's a whole other thing again, isn't it? Okay, let's go. Let's wind this up for our last couple of minutes. Let's go on to top tips. So, bearing in mind you have a very particular narrative that's very different to a lot of people's, but there are people out there, I'm guessing, in your kind of position who don't have this kind of platform to say, look, this is real, this is us. So what top tips have you found to survive, dare I say, venture into thrive at times, which have kept you going during everything you've been through and the shielding part of this weird relationship? Top tips for other shielders.
So I think the first thing I would say is that even though I am obviously a priest, at the same time, we now know that there are many, many people who have experienced grief during this dreadful time. Tens of thousands of people who have had to experience and walk through grief in a way that none of us would ever have planned, and that completely makes fall away, I suppose, all of our social rituals that we would expect during a time like this. You know, you would expect to have the doorbell ringing and someone bringing a casserole to your door and hanging out on the sofa with tissues, whether you want them to be there or not.
Yeah,
but you'd
there. Yeah.
You know, yeah, you'd expect to have the big funeral and the tears and the hugs. Yeah. And so for me, it has been about having that stripped away, and how on earth do I deal with grief in this? But in answer to your question about a tip, I think what I would say is that embrace where you are, and you can spend all of your time wishing that things were different, and that you were perhaps, if you had to experience grief, doing it in the way that we normally would, but embrace it. So for me, this experience of grief, even though at times it has definitely been lonely and has definitely been isolating, it has also in its own way been peaceful, because there are no expectations on me, at the risk of stating the obvious, to go out of the house or to participate in the social stuff. So when I've needed to be at home, to be hanging out in the swing in my back garden, to sleep, of just letting yourself be in that moment. And I think I would say that both for people who are grieving and also for people who are just embracing this shielding thing of, if you need to sleep, sleep. If you need to hang out with Netflix, hang out with Netflix. If you want to do something productive like learning Greek or Hebrew or knitting, that's great, you go for it. But if what you need to do is just to be in the moment, that's okay. And when everything is stripped away of all of our social rituals, of all of our routines, of all of the things that we see as being normal life, who are we? And just embracing that and dealing with it. The other thing that I think I would say is, in my particular case, because for such a long time I found it so difficult to pray, in many times, particularly as priests, but certainly as Christians generally, there can be an expectation that we know what to say, that we have the words, and that it's perfectly okay to say, "Dear God," and it all comes out. But in moments like this, I haven't had the words. So, as I said earlier, sometimes it's been about looking at those pictures. For me, one of the things that's been very helpful is listening to music. So music that forms a prayer, even if it isn't a traditional prayer. Yeah. So one of the ones that I've listened to an awful lot is called "Praise You in the Storm" by Casting Crowns.
Oh, I know that,
and
yeah.
it's a song, it's a song that says, God, by now I was sure you would have reached down and taken away our pain and sorrow. But instead I hear a quiet voice saying, I'm with you. I'm with you in the storm. So if you can't pray, listen to a piece of music that feels prayerful for you. If you can't pray the extempore prayer, pray the Lord's Prayer. Pray a liturgy prayer, because sometimes the prayers that are written down get a bit of grief for being too formal. But I have found in this last year that when you don't have the words, they give you the words. And then accept help when it's offered. Because both the scenario of being stuck in the house with Chris when he was alive, and then also the shielding, which has continued on afterwards, has meant that as a vicar, I'm used to being the helper. I'm used to being the person who finds somebody else's needs, identifies them, and does my level best to meet them. Yeah. But now, as both shielding clergy and also as bereaved clergy, I'm having to allow other people to help me. So in the beginning, I had those lovely food parcels with how many potatoes and dodgy carrots? Like,
we had 2 bags of pears in one of ours. I'm like, who the hell needs 2 bags of pears? Anyway, but it was nice to have it.
And to be perfectly honest, waking up and discovering a food parcel on the doorstep in some ways was a relief because we needed it. But at the same time, it was also really humbling of having to accept that in this moment in time, I can't be in control. I can't do for myself. I have to accept other people. And then I've also had a gorgeous neighbor down the road who at one point put her phone number through my letterbox of, if you need anything collecting, I'm here. I'd never met her before. She had never met me. Since then, we've become friends. And multiple times a week, she texts me if I'm just popping down to Sainsbury's. Do you need anything? Do you need anything collecting? So accept the help. Swallow your pride if you have to. And accept the help that's offered. And finally, absolute final top tip, if you decide that you would really like to change your hair, and having had nice long hair, that you decide it would be fabulous to go short and funky, don't do that 4 weeks before all of the hairdressers shut down. Because that's what I did. So now I am rocking really interesting lockdown hair, because my hair was down here and it wouldn't have mattered. And I thought, no, I'm going to go for a really short, funky, spiky cut. And 4 weeks later, all of the hairdressers shut down. That would be a top tip to avoid.
Yeah, I like my hair like this. This is perfect, even though my mother hates it, but it's fine. There's issues there. And I go to the hairdressers every time. A new hairdresser. I moved to Oxford area a year ago, and I went in with quite kind of long, and it was growing out, and it was straggly, and I'm like, I just need it really like scissor cut on top and shave. And they're like, are you sure? Like, yeah, trust me. And of course, just before lockdown came in, I think I was due to have my hair cut on March 17th. And at that point, the salon shut and said, we just can't do it. And I'm like, oh, but it needs to be, and it's going in. And so about a week in, we went to the website and bought a Bayless. And just kind of went, it'll be fine.
And knowing me as you do, Katie, my hair is normally blue, pink, purple, green,
every colour.
Funky, so like the colour's gone. There's lots of grey, So just top tips: if you have to do a crazy haircut, feel free. Just don't do it before a worldwide pandemic. If you can
carefully. Charlotte, you always look fabulous anyway, whatever colour your hair is, whether you're in PJs with no makeup or hair done and face done for camera, you always look fabulous. And I'm always amazed by you. And, we don't see each other in real space very often. And I watch you with interest. I'm not stalking you, but I watch your life unfold.
Share there.
Yeah, I'm the neighbour with the telescope looking for your letterbox. Through a closed eye, that doesn't work. But I kind of see your life unfold through the lens of Facebook, and I just think you are utterly remarkable. So thank you for talking with me on my series of recordings of Clergy Shielding. Have a fabulous day. Give Adam an appropriate squeeze from all of your lovely friends out here in the social media world, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katie.
Bye.
Bye.